All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks, everybody, for being here in person. And for those folks that are online, thank you so much for being here. My name is Cinnamon Moffett. I am the Associate Director of Marine Research Support here at Hatfield, located in Newport, Oregon. Thanks, everybody, for being here. It's been a little quiet around here without our federal partners, so thanks, everybody, who came to the talk today in person. Appreciate that. Couple logistics, and then we're just going to jump into it because I know today's speaker has a lot to share with us. So for folks online, if you have any questions, go ahead and put those into the chat box. Our volunteer, Roseanne, will read those out at the end, and we'll be able to get those questions answered for you. If you notice anything where you're struggling to hear us or you don't see something the way you think you should, please put that in the chat as well. Don't let that slide so we can get that fixed for you all and get things going. For folks in the room, a couple new faces, but if you have any questions when we get to the question and answer, just raise your hand and I'll bring you a mic, and that way folks online can hear as well. I wanted to do a couple of quick announcements and then we'll get rolling here. There's a really good chance that next week's seminar might get canceled because of the government shutdown. I will confirm that with all of you on Monday morning when I send out the announcements, and we'll make changes online. But that might be something that happens, so I just wanted to let you know that. But the other event that's happening next week that will happen for sure is that we have our very first Science on Tap event on Friday, October 24th. We have Astrid Leitner, who will be here talking about deep sea mining. And so that is a pretty hot topic. And so I'm hoping that you'll all come out on a Friday evening. The social hour starts at 5 and the talk begins at 6 in this location. So I hope you come and join us for that. But like I said, I want to just jump into today's talk and introduce Marnie Zibel, who is our Research Facilities Coordinator here at Hatfield. She joined us last year from the College of CEOS on main campus after spending 25 years going to sea as a technician and a lab manager. She holds a master's in marine science from Western Washington University and a bachelor's in biology from UC San Diego. And if you know Marnie, you know this, and if you don't know, you should know it now. She's a treasure trove of information, and so if you have any questions at all, she is just full of information, is willing to share. So I'm really excited to pass this mic off to her and learn a little bit more about what she's been working on for the last year. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Cinnamon. I think I turned my mic on. Can you hear me? All right, awesome. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you for the introduction, Cinnamon. And I'm really excited to share with you all a little bit more about the Coastal Monitoring Station. Uh-oh. Okay, thanks. So this is truly a collaborative effort between our state and federal and industry partners. And so I'll be acknowledging them throughout the talk. And I really am just kind of a messenger, I feel like, because this project has been ongoing for several years now, almost 10 years. So since I just arrived, I want to acknowledge that. I think the idea, I was asking Cinnamon, I think it started back in 2017, maybe even earlier, with Cinnamon and EPA's T. Chris Mochan Kalura. And it's a really cool story that I'm really excited and still learning about. So because I just arrived last year, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself and my background. I spent almost 30 years going to sea as an ocean-going tech and lab manager, as Cinnamon mentioned. I started out as an undergrad at UC San Diego, and I started kind of wandering into the labs at Scripps and begging them to let me work with them. And they took me on as an intern and even started paying me eventually. And then I went to grad school at Western. And when I finished my master's, I spent a year at Skidaway down in Georgia, and then ended up here about 20 years ago. But yeah, all along I was going on research cruises. I can get the pointer working here. Every year, at least once a year, I realized I was going on cruises for almost 30 years. And it started out kind of like with nets and microscopes in the 90s, bringing samples back to the lab, analyzing discrete water samples with for like phytoplankton pigments, things like that. And then more recently, in the last 10 years, things got a little more automated, and I got more experience working with automated instruments that we program and throw out in the ocean for months at a time. And that's kind of how I ended up working here on the little mini mooring that we have on our dock. So for many of you, if you're newer to Hatfield, you may or may not have heard of the Newport hydrographic line. I think most of you here in the audience have heard of that, but it started over 60 years ago with scientists measuring basic oceanographic parameters at the time. And they didn't really know what they were looking for at the time, but I don't think they even really knew what climate change was back then. But today, Jen Fisher's group with NOAA continues this really important effort, and they're getting more extensive samples every year. They've always collected salinity, temperature, pH, and oxygen. I know they run plankton nets and take phytoplankton pigments. And they try to get out, I believe, 25 miles every 2 weeks, probably not right now with the shutdown, which is just an amazing, just Herculean effort. And this kind of long-term time series is more important now than ever, obviously, as our ocean keeps changing. So the original line, I think, went off 200 or more miles off our coast due west. And so many folks have referred to Hatfield here at the edge of the ocean on the estuary as NH0, because we are 0 miles off the coast. And there's a lot going on here at NH0. There's, I think we calculated 10,000 Olympic swimming pools worth of water, of seawater, comes back and forth under our iconic bridge twice a day with the tides. And we have a tidal influence that extends at least, 10 miles upriver. And I also want to acknowledge that for 10,000 years, the Yacona people made a really good living here on the coast, on our estuary and our coast. They're abundant shellfish and fish and kelp species. And in the 1700s and 1800s, they were attacked and removed to a reservation several miles upriver. So there are, I think, less than 20 members of their descendants remaining. And I want to acknowledge that there's lots of ways for us to understand water quality here in our estuary, but the Yacona were the first to do it. Today, you can see we have downtown Newport here. We've got the Coast Guard fleet, the Newport fishing fleet, Marine Ops is right here next to us, and we've got the Oregon Coast Aquarium. We have our 50-acre campus here, and I think it was 1988. I was looking back through all the little history on the walls. I think it was 1988 that we started pumping water, maybe before that. Correct me if I'm wrong. They started pumping water from our little dock here into all of the state and federal research labs on campus, as well as the visitor center. And as you can imagine, it's important for the labs to understand the water quality of the water that we're pumping and make sure that it's salty enough. A big problem we have here in the wintertime, as I've talked with Dave and Ray and the facilities, is that it's hard to get salty enough water. So we have to wait until high tide. And when a big storm comes through, sometimes the water, we only have like half an hour that we can really pump, because the rest of the day the water is too fresh and it would kill the animals in our tanks. So it's been important to monitor that here in our estuary. But you may wonder, why have we been monitoring the coast? 60 years ago, when OSU researchers began the NH line, they didn't really know what they'd find back then. I think only a few scientists understood anything about climate change, or that it might happen someday. But it turns out we humans are really good at emitting carbon dioxide, which hasn't just caused global warming. As you all probably know, carbon dioxide dissolves in the ocean and forms carbonic acid, which lowers the pH and decreases the availability of the carbonate ion, which is the building block of our shell-forming animals, especially their larvae. And more recent research has found that even crab, we know this is true about oyster larvae because we had this crisis about 20 years ago when our oyster hatcheries lost all of their larvae for over a year. They weren't able to supply larvae to oyster farmers. And now more recently, we've discovered it's true of crab larvae as well. And there's ongoing research into that. And then we have this problem of ocean acidification that's been happening for at least 20 years. And then we have these compounding factors of upwelling and hypoxia here on our coast. And we've all experienced these strong winds from the north in the summer. And obviously you've probably seen these images many times in your classes and other talks like this. But the north winds blow in the summertime and push the surface water. And then as that surface water is moved, the bottom water comes up. The deep water comes up, and it's acidified water and very low in oxygen, high in nutrients, and that sets up these massive hypoxic zones, which are areas with really low oxygen, less than 1.4 milliliter oxygen per liter. So if you imagine your Nalgene liter bottle, that's like only about a thousandth or around that much is oxygen, and that's not enough to keep our animals on the shelf alive. So we've had these massive die-offs of crabs and other animals in the summer, and the acidification is also compounded with that problem. And these hypoxic zones are growing. Jack Barth and Francis Chan have found that the hypoxic zones sometimes are as big as the Willamette Valley, an area that big off of our shelf with not enough oxygen for important species like crabs. So yeah, with gliders and other moorings, we've been able to kind of create this network of instrumentation to kind of monitor it. So we're hoping that eventually it'll be kind of like the weather app on your phone, so you can kind of look at the ocean weather. So there's an app like Nanus that many of us are familiar with. So crab fishermen and others can kind of see what's coming, and we're hoping to contribute to that. So if you're a marine scientist, you probably like long-term data sets to study these kinds of things. But unfortunately, we haven't always had great metadata or data format continuity through the years. I'm glad to see David here. He's helping me go back through some of these data sets dating back to the 80s. We don't even know who was taking these measurements off our dock back then. Seabird Scientific is a instrument company that deployed a mooring for about 6 years in the estuary, so they've got a pretty good data set there. It's easily searchable and still available online. But our best data set was from Chris Mochan Kalura, here seen deploying some instrumentation off our dock. He worked with the EPA and had this amazing data set from 2009 till last year when he was forced to retire, or actually this year. And fortunately, his data was so good that his data has been published on the EPA's website. But these kinds of websites aren't necessarily guaranteed with our current administration, especially the federal ones. So I encourage you to work with David and me if you're interested. There's a project called the Data Rescue Project, where we're working to kind of like save data like this to make sure it doesn't get taken down. So fortunately, the Oregon State Legislature realized that this kind of data set was really important and this kind of monitoring. So they, in 2021, they recognized they needed to, well, they declared a state of emergency regarding ocean chemistry, which is really helpful because it was a bipartisan bill that appropriated funding for this kind of monitoring and established like the Oregon Ocean Science Trust to help support longer term funding to make sure that we continue this really important work. So around that time, because Cinnamon and Chris in 2017, even before the state of emergency was declared, they realized that this instrumentation was slowly becoming obsolete, and we got kicked off the NANUS website, and we're no longer being constantly in real-time data on NANUS. And so that was a problem, and we, well, Cinnamon wanted to alleviate that and make sure that we had some more stable funding supplied so we could continue the monitoring here. So even now on the NANUS map, I'll show you later, we're still grayed out. We're very close to being reinstated on NANUS, which is this app that shows real-time water quality data. And so around that time in 2017, my understanding is that Cinnamon and TCRIS started talking to all of these lovely people here at Hatfield and beyond to try to figure out, like, if we did eventually get money for more support, how would we do this? How can we make a more stable, really robust sampling and monitoring program? So she brought in Trevor, who's great with instruments and plumbing, and Drummond in the iLab, who like can make anything and build anything. And let's see, Jessica Garwood in CEOS is a data scientist who's really great with big data sets. And Eric with Seabird, who's an industry partner who works for the company that makes our instruments. And Katie Watkins Brandt, who manages the instrumentation for the NOAA fleet. And then Steve Pasella with the EPA runs the Berkolator, which is a carbon dioxide instrument. So with that amazing team, they started meeting. This is also still all before I arrived. So thank you for doing all this, Cinnamon. They started planning and talking about, what should we measure and why, and how often should we measure, how should we set these instruments. I remember getting emails from Cinnamon way back then when I was still working at OOI, asking about instrument settings and things. And I didn't know that all of this was happening back then. I didn't understand the full aspect of it. So they decided to continue the measurements with the YSI, which is the instrument that TCRIS and the EPA had been deploying for 16 years, and then add in these Seabird instruments so that we kind of have overlapping measurements of this old instrument and the newer instruments and see how they compare. And so just kind of a timeline of all of that stuff that I've already kind of been talking about. Around the same time, I think it was 2021, Hatfield received some more funds to rebuild our crumbling wooden dock. And so it was now it's no longer made of wood. It's made of concrete and steel, which is really nice. We have this new pump house. Drummond and the iLab designed and built a little room within the pump house with a little hole in the deck so we could deploy instruments, and with a spare winch to deploy extra instruments if scientists like yourselves want to test your instruments right next to ours. You can bring your instrument, your little prototypes, and test them out. So here's a great image of the Cinnamon and Drummond kind of helping TCRIS deploy our new instrumentation and anchors and things. I came along last year and we deployed everything and got some real-time data flowing. And then this year we're really leaning into outreach. As you can imagine, we're really trying to figure out how to get voters to care about water quality and get them to vote about it. So our above water components here is our dock and the pump house, and the little CMS room is right here. We have the USDA research oyster dock is right next to us. And then my dog here is not to scale. And then we have the image of the room here. We have the two winches where you can see the CMS instrument frame is ready to deploy here. We've got our C cables with serial data and power coming to an enclosure here. We have a Raspberry Pi inside here for a logger, and then connected to an Ethernet for constant data and power. And then here's an image that Francis Chan took, actually. He was deploying, using our spare winch here, he was deploying one of his, I think it was an open CTD and an oxygen sensor using our test winch setup. And so under the water, you can see we have is kind of a little cartoon to show what's going on down there. Keep in mind, this is all covered in barnacles and biofouling and sediment and all sorts of things. But down at the bottom, there's a anchor plate with some static lines to prevent the package from moving too much with the tides and currents. And we have our little instrument frame here, and it's about 8 meters below the deck and 1 meter up from the estuary floor. And so the instruments themselves in that little frame, this is the original instrument that TCRIS and the EPA and research reserves, estuary research reserves nationwide use. It's a really useful instrument. It has like a CTD, measures salinity, temperature, depth, pH, dissolved oxygen, phytoplankton, and turbidity. And so we, along with that, we started overlapping measurements with a seabird eco triplet, which also measures phytoplankton fluorescence and scattering. Like oceanographers call it scattering, estuary scientists call it turbidity. I'm learning that there's a little bit of overlap here between the two. And then we have a seabird SUNA, which measures nitrate. It's basically just a UV spectrophotometer because it turns out nitrate absorbs UV photons. And then we also are still in testing for a seabird CFOX, which is kind of all of the above of these two instruments. It has a CTD, does pH, dissolved oxygen. We're still in process of testing that one and getting it to work correctly, but it is coming soon, hopefully. You may have noticed in this cartoon, this white thing here. This is well, I guess we call it a sampling well, where we have a tube that goes down and brings up water for an imaging flow cytobot. Trevor did a really great job of speccing out this peristaltic pump to bring water up from the deep to supply water for our IFCB. And most of us have probably seen a peristaltic pump. It's about the size of a toaster maybe, but this one is like the size of a Volkswagen. It's really impressive. So if we ever have it out, you should come check it out. It's the biggest peristaltic pump you've ever seen. So it actually does a great job. The reason we are using a peristaltic pump instead of any other kind of pump that you might use is because we don't want to destroy our beautiful diatom chains for these gorgeous pictures that Maria and her technician Kelly were able to take. So they managed to deploy the IFCB here during July of this year, and they got some great photos. And the point of this initial test was just to see, could we do it? And certainly they did a great job. We found some ciliates, my favorite, the tintinids with their little glass bells, they tell me were intact. And so our next plan is to deploy a more permanent IFCB. So we're still working on that. It's in the works. And that is because we are sadly lacking in permanent IFCB deployments on the Northwest coast. California is putting us to shame right now. They have 12 different IFCBs along their whole coast. They have this great monitoring network, which is really useful for harmful algal blooms. They can detect, they actually have this really compelling data I saw recently where they could actually see a harmful algal bloom as it kind of made its way up the coast from the south to the north. And so if we had something like that deployed in Oregon, we probably could have seen it up here too. And it's a really good early warning sign that shellfish managers could use to manage the harvest. So right now there are none in Washington or Oregon that are permanent. And I'm working on a plan to write a shovel-ready kind of proposal for whenever the world is not upside down anymore and we might get funding again. So the other instrument that we most recently deployed was the Berkelator, named after our own Burke Hales here at OSU. And it measures high-frequency carbon chemistry observations and climate quality measurements of PCO2 and DIC. It's operated right now by Steve Pacello with the EPA, and we're not sure if he requires all of his trad climbing gear to deploy the Berkelator, but he looks pretty badass in this picture, so I had to use that. And you notice he's also in his his button up, so he's ready at any moment to to talk about his data. I personally was really surprised during just like this, what is it, a 10-day period in August. We had really high PCO2 values and really low pH. I wasn't expecting it to get down to 7.3. So we're really hoping that when the government opens back up, he'll be back to redeploy this. And constant kind of real-time data is really important. I guess I can keep an eye on the time, but if anybody has questions about the Berkolator, we can talk about this slide later, but this kind of spaghetti mess here of tubes, the water comes in and is equilibrated with the air stream and the headspace. The air in the headspace goes through these tubes and then into a LICOR, which is an infrared spectrophotometer here in the enclosure. And then it's calibrated with, we have some gas standards down here and some liquid standards up near the ceiling of the CMS. It's a really cool instrument. So we're hoping the government will open back up and we'll get it back online. So a little bit about our data architecture, like how does the data get from the instruments to our websites? So I want to give a lot of credit to the Coriolis team in the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences. Jazz, Chris, and Tristan are really great and help me all the time when I am like, why is it not working? Like just today, I went out there and we were having power issues yesterday, and I looked at the data online and all we had was nitrate data in the real-time website. So restarted everything. There's always little things here and there that we have to check. And these guys are really patient with me. So yeah, so in brief, kind of the instruments at the dock are taking their measurements, their raw data, and sending it via the serial cables up into a little Raspberry Pi, as I mentioned in the enclosure on the dock. And we have some logging software. It's open source software. You can find it on GitHub. It's called OpenRVDAS, and that software reads in the raw data and transforms it and parses it, applies our calibration coefficients from when we calibrate here in the lab or back at the manufacturer. And then it writes that raw data and the transformed data out over our fiber network to the Oregon State Data Center in Salem, where we have some virtual machines and a database and web server that hosts our web services with our real-time data, and the Hatfield website that we have that I'll show you in a minute, and data services like our ERDAP, and hopefully within the next month or two, we'll be back up on Nanus. And this is all based on, really importantly, this system, the Coriolis system, is based on a system they developed for research vessels. So if you've ever been on the Sikuliak or the Oceanus, its last days, the Coriolis system was installed on that. So you could walk aboard and scientists could see the data coming from the flow-through instruments in real time, which is really cool. And so we kind of like stole that idea and put it on the dock. We're treating our dock kind of like a research vessel, and it will be installed on the Tani. So we're trying to get kind of the same suite of instruments and data access at the dock as we'll have at the Tani or on the Tani, kind of in real time, which will be really nice when the Tani's parked right next to us. So here's what our website looks like right now. It covers most of the same things that are that I'm talking about in this talk. You're welcome to go check that out. I'll have a QR code at the end. And here is an example of our real-time data. I always try to put the depths or tide in black. And then here in this example, you can see the oxygen and pH in this plot over the course of about 24 hours. This site will show you the data in the last 24 hours. And this plot down here, you also have salinity and temperature in red. And there's another plotting system on the same website that they just call the customizable plot, that you can plot up to 3 weeks of data. And you can choose your own adventure, like whatever parameters you want, for up to 3 weeks, which is kind of cool. And then we also have our ERDAP, which I know it's an acronym soup for this talk, and I apologize, but it stands for the Environmental Research Division Data Access Program run by NOAA. And then we're getting that, the ERDAP in general is a way to download larger data sets. If you're interested, if you're a data science or a student looking for larger data sets, ERDAP is a great place to start. And then for data apps like NaNOOS, where you can kind of like go on your phone and try to get the ocean weather, if you will, NaNOOS is a really great app to check out. And so we're trying to get ourselves back online on NaNOOS. As you can see here, we're still grayed out because we're so close. We have our first step was to get our metadata into the Climate Forecast Naming Convention, which is just so that the data harvesters can, the machines know what to look for when they're looking for data to put on their website. And then we have one more step that's happening right now with the Coriolis folks to just, getting our actual data format parsed in a way that ERDAP or the ERDAP and the NaNOOS can read it in. And then we'll be back online, which I'm really looking forward to. And so a little bit about real-time data QA/QC. I know I'm not sure about this audience if you're interested at all, but it turns out that there is a whole a group of scientists who are just specifically looking at how do we do QA/QC on data that is coming in real time, because you don't get to spend months and years looking at it before you put it out to the public. So there is actually this group called CORTOD that is for the quality assurance, quality control of real-time oceanographic data, and they came up with a list of kind of best practices, a manual for each specific parameter, like whether it's oxygen or salinity or whatever. They came up with a group of tests. So you could say, like, is it within the realm that you would throw out? Should you flag it? And what are those tests? So for CORTOD, obviously we don't have a location parameter for the CMS. Unless something goes really wrong, we're not going to change our location. And then we have other tests like the GAP test. And I have kind of some, what else? The syntax test and gross range. So the GAP test is kind of like, is this parameter within the realms that you expect it, within the time window that you expect it? The syntax test is like, are the letters and numbers making sense? Or it'll flag if it doesn't. And the gross range test, like, is the salinity, what you would expect for an estuary? So all of those things are being tested in real time, and they're being flagged if they're outside of these preset ranges that we determine. And then, so there's some overlap for Coriolis and CORTOD, and some of these things like climatology and global range are basically the same thing. They're just being called different things, but that's also a range that we would say like makes sense for depending on the season, for example. And then Coriolis also adds another test, which is just the sensor status, where I can go in and say like, oh, I'm currently calibrating the SUNA, so I would take it offline, and so that would be flagged. So I have some examples of some recent data from this summer. We, as many of you probably remember, we had an earthquake, or Russia had an earthquake, and we all kind of braced ourselves for a tsunami here on the West Coast, and some parts got bigger waves than others. And ours came through at about midnight that night, and this top graph here, you can see the depth is in black. This is over the course of about 24 hours. And then these other plots down here in gold and purple and brown are turbidity and fluorescent dissolved organic matter. And all of our sensors picked up this little, it turned out to be just like a 6-inch tidal wave that we got, but we picked it up, and we had this kind of wobble in our depth data, and that caused, in the ocean, we call it the nepheloid layer. It's a layer of kind of flock and turbid stuff. You've probably seen it if you're out there. And it kind of got picked up too, and all of our sensors detected that as well. And then the really interesting thing that I didn't know anything about until now is this thing called sashing, where the water in the estuary kind of bangs or sloshes back and forth against the walls of the estuary. And that kind of sloshing or sashing continued for almost a week. So if you look down here at the bottom plot, it's over the course of about 6 days, you can see these like wobbles in the depth data continued, which was really interesting. And I'd never seen that before. Another example of some real data from this year happened in the spring. As we talked about earlier, we obviously have upwelling here on the coast, and that doesn't start until the spring transition that everyone celebrates. So I wasn't sure like when exactly it happened, but I was looking through some recent data, and I saw on this plot, you can see this is about the course of about 10 days. And again, depth is in black and oxygen is in blue. And we had this this pattern here until about April 18th is our typical, I guess, signal that you would see here in the estuary for winter, where it's, there's like definitely a pattern with the tide. But all of a sudden it changed on April 18th with the incoming water. We had this huge drop in oxygen. And then it happened again with the next big high tide. We had the incoming water and this drop in oxygen. And that pattern just continued. And I was like, I wonder if that's the spring transition. I think maybe the winds started blowing and I missed it. You usually can feel it on your face every afternoon. So I looked at some of our other sensors. One of our colleagues in CEOS, Mike Cosrow, has a really great system of high-frequency radar towers that are up and down our coast, and they measure the movement of the surface water. And I've worked on some of these towers. They're really cool. If you've ever been walking along the beach, you've probably seen them. And the arrows in these different plots here indicate the strength and direction of the water movement at the surface. And so on the 10th and 11th of April, not much was really happening. It wasn't really moving that much. And then all of a sudden on the 12th, you can see here that the water really starts moving southward. The size of the arrow kind of indicates the speed, which is pretty cool. And so that kind of corroborated the data that I'd seen here in the estuary. So then I knew there's also some oxygen data that on our mooring, our OOI mooring at NH10 is out there, and there are oxygen sensors on the anchor, which is this green line here at 262 feet. And then there are also oxygen sensors up closer to the surface. I know this because I used to work on for the last 7 years. And sure enough, on around the 17th of April, you can see the oxygen just tank, and it stayed low, for the rest of the summer. So it was kind of a cool comparison of like these 3 different ocean and sensors that we have deployed in different places. And it's unfortunately federally funded sites like OOI are being suspended. I think this particular mooring is still out there, but all the rest of the moorings associated with OOI, the endurance array here off of Washington and Oregon, have been suspended as of this year. So this fall, I don't know if you saw the RIDE came in and brought in all of these moorings, and only one of them went back out. So I feel like this is a huge, brain drain and talent drain that is left when, all these folks are now moving on to different jobs. But we've also lost a significant amount of data coverage off our coast. It's just an invaluable set of data. And so I feel like it's all the more incumbent upon us who are state funded to really get it right going forward. So who uses this data? We want to make sure that we know I'm trying to find out who all has been using it so far, because it's really important to, as I'm saying, like get it right. And so so far I've heard from some users like the USDA Pacific Shellfish Research Unit. They have this beautiful new system here of the research oyster cages. They're secured right here next to the CMS and pump house. And the sensors are, right here next to them, so that's really helpful for them. And then we also have from here where the water is pumped, it goes all over campus, as I mentioned, and we have the NOAA Northwest Fisheries Science Center. Their tanks are being pumped, the water is being pumped to them. They're using it for their juvenile groundfish and salmon research. And we have several visiting scientists and OSU scientists all over campus that use this pumped water. Obviously, our own visitor center uses the water for their exhibits. I've heard from the Oregon Coast Aquarium next door. They also use our data. We had the MBARI Earth K through 12 educators were here this summer creating a curriculum based on some of our data and our websites. And yeah, as I mentioned, the facilities team uses this data for when to pump and when to not pump. And our animal care team, obviously, they need to know how salty, and they need to know about the water quality for the animals. And so speaking of the visitor center, we're really leaning into outreach this year with a new exhibit about the CMS. And it's still under construction right now, but right now I think all we have up there is this poster, but we're also working on a instrument frame replica here in the iLab. You can check it out after this talk if you like. And they're also working on a webcam, so people will be able to spy on the estuary floor. We're going to actually we're going to suspend the camera looking down from our instrument cage. And then Raven, who's an intern in the iLab, has developed this system where you can pan and zoom the camera and turn on a light and stuff. So visitors can do that. And really, we're trying to really engage people and get them kind of to be drawn in. And we're thinking of there's a whole family there. There's maybe different people who are going to be interested in the different aspects of water quality. And then the final thing is we're working on a new video game to engage people in water quality issues like ocean acidification and hypoxia. And I think Danny Pimentel is coming to talk in a couple weeks, right? On the 30th, I believe. He's developing, he and his colleagues at the UO Reality Lab are developing this video game. It's gone through several iterations. It started out really clunky. It's slowly getting better, but the new version is really cool. It really engages the visitors to, it's kind of like an immersive thing where you are the oyster farmer and you need to figure out are you going to add carbonate or oxygen to your water to try to get your oyster larvae to live. It has different views of the estuary, so keep an eye out for that. And then we have our other potential users that we're hoping will use this, like the crabbers and oyster hatcheries. We have obviously the Oregon oyster farm just a little bit upriver, and then the ODFW harmful algal bloom monitoring. Currently, I think the Oregon Department of Ag uses precipitation data to shut down our shellfish harvest, and then they use testing of the actual tissue to open it back up. But we're hoping if we do get an IFCB, we can really kind of narrow that down to inform harvest management. And then we have just local tourists and folks who are doing shellfish harvesting. And I think our biggest user of our websites, I hear, is the folks who want to know about our weather. So very important to know what the temperature is and how hard the wind is blowing before you come out to the coast. So we are actually we have a new little mini weather station that we're going to mount out on the dock. And we have the station. I'm working with the Martex in Marine Ops to mount this on a mast. And my little pipe dream is I've talked to Burke and Steve of the Berkolator, and they said we can run an air tube up the mast and get air PCO2. So with that and the wind, we'll be able to get the estuary carbon dioxide flux, which is a really important component to understand, like seasonally, are we a carbon sink or a carbon source? Probably changes with the seasons, like most estuaries. And then a final word about kind of biofouling. Things go wrong and like almost daily. So, you know, barnacles are always a thing. We can't really put biofouling, you know, paint on the frames because we're right there next to our friends with the oyster research. So there's a lot of scraping that happens almost on a weekly basis. Earlier this year in April, we got nailed by the herring eggs. I think is it the blood moon? There's like one or 2 days where they lay all their eggs, and so we got coated with herring eggs for a while. And then you can really see when we tape instruments with copper tape, you can see in this picture here, like the barnacles are everywhere except for where the copper tape is. So if you ever want to come out and help me scrape barnacles, I would like to extend an open invitation. So I've kind of talked a little bit about like what's next and what our plans are. But Cinnamon and I have kind of this grand idea that we would like to create kind of a best practices document or a you know, living lab or a program so that we can figure out like what is working for these different marine stations like us. We know there's one CritFic with CMOP in Astoria. There's the Tillamook station. There's the station at the South Slough National Estuary Research Reserve. So we're really hoping to look into that and see like what's working for us and what's not. As I mentioned, we're getting up on NANUS this fall and looking at different data repos, like if the federal shutdown continues, where else we're looking at. There's one called Zenodo that we might look at. Biofouling is always a thing. Yeah, trying to figure out what works for a website. So please reach out to me if you have feedback on our website, things that would work better. Please let me know. The QR code for our website's here. And yeah, please come talk to me about how do we get voters interested in science? Like, I really want to lean into this. You know, Matt's talked about our spheres of influence. So we do what we can, right? And so I'd love to hear from any of you if you have ideas to help us along the way. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Marnie. That was a lot of things, so I am sure that we might have some questions from the audience, but I want to start and invite those that are online. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them into the chat. Roseanne, do we have any yet? Okay, and how about in the room? Any questions in the room? Yeah, John.
Are there still data sets, old data sets that you're gathering for this? And there must be a lot of them over the last 50 years.
Yeah, I think, you know, probably the best example would be the NH line data. I would say if you're really looking for that kind of like longer term data, as I mentioned, Jen Fisher with NOAA is continuing that effort. I don't think I have a slide with the actual access to her data, so I would reach out to her for that. But I think I do have a slide where I'm talking about David and I. Here it is. Yeah, so we haven't quite put these 3 data sets together. And then I guess now we have our 4th data set, which will be the new data coming in from the instruments on the dock. So that is something that we're actively working on so that it is one continuous data set with the same data format and the same metadata, but it's going to require some work. As you can see, it's kind of a lot. Good question.
Other questions? Roseanne, it looks like you might have a question online.
How well do the instruments under the dock in Newport work when debris builds up?
Oh, well, that's a good question. Well, they don't. If they get, I frequently find, you know, we go out there at least once every week or two, and usually one of the first things I see when we pull up the instrument package is that we get little baby rockfish. I think that's what Trevor calls them, that get into the little copper cover. So that would definitely be a cause for data to be flagged, because those the different little instruments, like the pH probe is probably like an inch from where these baby rockfish like to hang out. So it's a good thing that we have these real-time QC flags, because the data does get impacted by barnacles and yeah, all sorts of things. We have ulva and all sorts of kelp species out there. So yes, definitely is affected.
All right, Matt had a question. Hang on.
Yeah, great presentation. Had a question for you about your data visualizer, the website visualizer. Do you have the capacity to build in some, pre-populate some examples of visualizations
Ooh.
from that? So for example, we get a lot of tourism here in the wintertime around,
Yeah.
right? Could those be examples of some good pre-populated snapshots that might be good communication types of tools?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We have, I mean, these are the real-time data sites that will pre-populate if you go to the website. This one here, and then the customizable plot are constantly available. So if you go to the website today, for example, you'll see the last 24 hours of data.
Right.
But that's a good point, Matt. Like you're saying, like if we, like that Kamchatka earthquake.
Come learn about king tides.
What's that?
Come learn about king tides. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want access to these kinds of images, I can provide them to whoever is interested. I could put them up in the visitor center if they're interested, or whatever. Yeah, like I think this one is a really cool one. But yeah, is that kind of what you're asking about? Yeah, cool things that happen in real time.
Other questions in the room? Roseanne, any other questions online? All right. Are we going to let Marnie off the hook? All right. How about one more round of applause for Marnie and all the hard work she's been doing? And
Thank
again,
you.
thanks everybody for coming. I will let you all know via the normal communication channels about next week's seminar. We'll see what happens there based on government shutdown. And then either way, come and see us on Friday when we learn a little bit more about deep sea mining. All right, everybody. Thank you so much.